Sarah Evans, a distinguished judge, sat in her chambers reviewing the day's cases with her morning coffee. Her achievements spoke volumes, graduating top of her class at Harvard Law, becoming the youngest judge in the state's history, and now serving as the Chief Justice of the Municipal Court. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of her office, casting a warm glow on the array of photographs and certificates adorning her walls. Each frame told a story of determination. Her law school graduation photo, where she stood proudly as class valedictorian, the day of her swearing-in ceremony with her beaming parents by her side, and a recent picture of her mentoring young law students from underprivileged backgrounds. As she sifted through the case files, her assistant Margaret knocked gently on the door. "Your Honor, I've brought you the updated schedule for today. There's been a slight change. Officer Reed's traffic violation case has been moved to first on the docket." Sarah nodded, taking the revised schedule while adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. She remembered Officer Reed from previous cases, known for his exemplary record in the field, but also for his somewhat casual approach to courtroom protocol. Several colleagues had mentioned his tendency to treat court proceedings with less formality than expected, though she had never experienced it firsthand. Taking another sip of her coffee, Sarah reflected on her journey to the bench. 25 years ago, she walked these same courthouse halls as an intern, absorbing every detail of the legal system. Her mother, a high school teacher, had always emphasized the importance of education and professionalism, while her father, a small business owner, taught her about dignity in the face of adversity. The antique clock on her wall chimed 9 times, a gift from her mentor, the late Judge Richardson. He had been the first to see her potential, encouraging her to aim for the bench when others thought she was too young, too ambitious. "The law," he used to say, "doesn't care about age or background. It cares about justice and wisdom." Sarah stood, smoothing her black robe as she prepared for the morning session. Her chambers, with its rich mahogany furniture and walls lined with law books, had become more than just an office. It was a symbol of everything she'd worked for. The morning light caught the silver nameplate on her desk. Honorable Sarah Evans, Chief Justice. She paused at her desk to review one last detail about Officer Reed's case. It was a simple traffic violation, but something in her gut told her to be thoroughly prepared. Throughout her career, she learned to trust these instincts. They had served her well during complex cases and helped her navigate delicate situations with both compassion and firmness. Margaret appeared again at the door. "Your Honor, the courtroom is ready. We have a full gallery today. Several law students from State University are observing as part of their judicial procedures class." Sarah smiled, remembering her own days as a law student, watching proceedings with wide-eyed fascination. Before leaving her chambers, she glanced at her favorite photograph, a black and white image of her grandmother, one of the first female attorneys in their state. The picture reminded her daily of the responsibility she carried, not just to uphold the law, but to maintain the dignity of the court for all who sought justice within its walls. She gathered her files, tucked her reading glasses into their case, and took a final look in the mirror. Her reflection showed a woman of confidence and composure, her salt and pepper hair neatly styled, her robe perfectly pressed. Each morning, this small ritual reminded her of the gravity of her position and the trust placed in her by the community. As she walked toward her courtroom, her footsteps echoing in the marble hallway, Sarah greeted the courthouse staff, the security guards, clerks, and custodians who kept the wheels of justice turning smoothly. She had learned early in her career that true leadership meant respecting every person, regardless of their role. The large wooden doors of Courtroom 3 loomed ahead. Sarah could hear the quiet murmur of voices inside, waiting for the day's proceedings to begin. With one last deep breath, she prepared to enter, unaware that this ordinary Tuesday morning would soon become anything but ordinary. The morning session began like any other. The courtroom buzzed with activity as lawyers shuffled papers and visitors filled the wooden benches. Officer Thomas Reed entered, his polished badge catching the fluorescent light as he walked straight past the bailiff without the customary security check. The historic Courtroom 3 maintained its grandeur despite its daily use. Ornate wooden panels lined the walls, and sunlight streamed through tall windows, creating patterns on the polished floor. The American flag stood proudly beside the judge's bench, its fabric still and dignified in the climate-controlled air. As Officer Reed made his way down the center aisle, several regular court attendees noticed his unusual demeanor. His uniform was pristine, pressed blue shirt, creased pants, and shoes that gleamed under the lights. Yet something in his bearing suggested defiance rather than respect. He carried himself with an air of someone who believed rules were meant for others. Court Clerk Mary Thompson, who had served for over 2 decades, watched with growing concern. She had developed a keen sense for courtroom dynamics, and something about Officer Reed's demeanor set off warning bells. She discreetly signaled to James, the bailiff, who straightened his posture in response. The law students from State University, seated in the back row with their notebooks ready, watched the officer with interest. Their professor had chosen this day for observation, hoping to demonstrate proper courtroom procedure. Instead, they were about to witness a lesson in professional conduct that no textbook could teach. Officer Reed chose a seat in the front row, directly facing the judge's bench. He pulled out his phone, something strictly prohibited during court sessions, and began typing. A young attorney seated nearby shifted uncomfortably, torn between speaking up and maintaining courtroom decorum. The gallery continued to fill. Among those present were 3 senior officers from Reed's precinct, there for an unrelated case. They noticed their colleagues' behavior with growing unease. Captain Martinez, Reed's direct supervisor, made a mental note to address the situation later. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted subtly as the clock approached 9:30. The usual pre-session murmur died down, replaced by an expectant hush. The door to the judge's chambers opened, and the bailiff stood, preparing to announce Judge Evans' entrance. But before he could speak, Officer Reed received a text message, his phone chiming loudly in the quiet courtroom. Instead of silencing it immediately, he continued reading, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Several heads turned in his direction, and a few disapproving murmurs rose from the gallery. The law students in the back exchanged glances, furiously scribbling notes. Their professor, a former prosecutor, shook her head slightly. She had tried cases before Judge Evans and knew the judge's strict adherence to courtroom protocol. Mary Thompson cleared her throat meaningfully, but Officer Reed appeared oblivious to the social cues around him. He crossed his legs, leaning back in the wooden chair as if he were waiting in a coffee shop rather than a court of law. The bailiff's voice finally rang out, "All rise," the Honorable Sarah Evans presiding. The rustle of movement filled the room as everyone stood, everyone except Officer Reed, who took his time finishing his text before slowly rising to his feet. Judge Evans entered with her characteristic grace, her robe flowing as she ascended to the bench. Her experienced eye quickly scanned the courtroom, taking in every detail, including Officer Reed's delayed response to the court's call to order. The morning sun had reached the perfect angle to illuminate the judge's bench, creating an almost theatrical setting. The great seal of the state court system hung on the wall behind Judge Evans, its motto clearly visible: justice, integrity, service. As she settled into her chair, Judge Evans reviewed the first case on her docket. The room remained standing, awaiting her signal to be seated. Officer Reed had already started to sit when the bailiff shot him a sharp look, forcing him to straighten up again. The tension in the room was palpable now. Regular court attendees recognized the signs of an impending confrontation, while the law students watched with rapt attention, sensing they were about to witness something significant. Judge Evans looked up from her papers, her gaze settling on Officer Reed. The morning's proceedings were about to take an unexpected turn, and everyone in Courtroom 3 was about to learn a lasting lesson in respect and dignity. When Judge Evans called his case, Officer Reed stood with a casual stance, one hand in his pocket while scrolling through his phone. The court clerk raised her eyebrows, and several attorneys straightened in their seats, sensing the tension building in the air. The morning light cast long shadows across the courtroom floor as Mary Thompson, the court clerk, announced the case number. Docket number 2025 TR 789. City versus Officer Thomas Reed. In the matter of a traffic violation, her voice carried the weight of 20 years' experience, each word precisely enunciated. Officer Reed continued scrolling through his phone, seemingly more interested in his screen than the proceedings. The galley of law students watched intently, their pens hovering over legal pads as they observed this departure from standard courtroom behavior. Their professor, a distinguished attorney herself, pressed her lips together in a thin line. Judge Evans observed the scene before her with practiced patience. Her years on the bench had taught her to read body language like a book, and Officer Reed's story was written in every casual gesture. His stance, his diverted attention, the slight upward tilt of his chin, all spoke of deliberate disregard. The silence in the courtroom grew heavier. Even the usual sounds, the shuffle of papers, the quiet cough, the creak of wooden benches seemed to fade away. Captain Martinez, seated 3 rows back, felt his face grow warm with second-hand embarrassment for his subordinate's behavior. Officer Reed, Judge Evans spoke, her voice clear and measured. The words hung in the air, waiting for acknowledgement. A few seconds passed before Reed glanced up from his phone, his expression suggesting mild annoyance of the interruption. Mary Thompson's pen scratched against paper as she documented every detail. In her 2 decades of service, she had developed an instinct for identifying moments that would become courthouse legend. This, she knew, would be one of them. The young attorneys present shifted in their seats, their own phones safely silenced and tucked away in briefcases. They had learned early in their careers that Judge Evans' courtroom demanded the highest standards of professional conduct. Now they watched, equal parts fascinated and horrified, as Officer Reed seemed determined to challenge those standards. Through the tall windows, a cloud passed over the sun, briefly dimming the natural light in the courtroom. In that moment, Officer Reed finally looked up, letting his phone drop to his side, but keeping his other hand firmly planted in his pocket. His posture remained casual, almost slouching, as he faced the bench. The law students in the back row scribbled furiously, documenting every detail of this unexpected lesson in what not to do in a courtroom. Their professor would later use this as a case study in professional ethics, though not in the way she had originally planned. Judge Evans' hands rested lightly on her desk, her silver rings catching the returning sunlight. Her expression remained neutral, but those who knew her well could see the slight tightening around her eyes, a signal that she was preparing to address something significant. Officer Reed, she repeated, her tone carrying a weight that made several people sit straighter in their seats. Before we proceed with your case, I need to ensure that you are fully present and prepared to participate in these proceedings. The bailiff moved slightly closer to the center of the room, his experienced instincts telling him this situation might require his attention. James had served in this courtroom for over a decade, and he recognized the signs of an impending teachable moment. Officer Reed's response was to shrug slightly, a gesture that sent a ripple of disbelief through the courtroom. Senior officers present exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of dismay and disapproval. Captain Martinez began mentally composing the remedial training order he would issue later that day. The morning sun had fully emerged from behind the cloud now, illuminating the scene in harsh clarity. The American flag's stars and stripes cast subtle shadows on the wall behind the judge's bench, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. As Judge Evans prepared to speak again, the atmosphere in the courtroom crackled with anticipation. Every person present knew they were about to witness something significant, a moment when the foundations of respect and authority in the justice system would either be upheld or challenged. "Good morning, Sarah," Officer Reed said with a slight smile. The room fell silent. Judge Evans paused, her pen hovering above her notepad. 20 years on the bench had taught her that moments like these required grace rather than anger. The grandfather clock in the corner of the courtroom ticked loudly in the sudden silence. Mary Thompson's fingers froze over her keyboard, and the law students in the back row stopped writing mid-sentence. Even the sunlight, streaming through the windows, seemed to pause, suspended in the gravity of the moment. Judge Evans placed her pen down with deliberate care, the soft click against the wooden bench echoing in the hushed courtroom. She removed her reading glasses slowly, folding them with precision before placing them beside her notepad. Every movement was measured, purposeful, a masterclass in controlled response. The senior officers present sat rigidly in their seats, their faces masks of professional neutrality, even as their eyes betrayed their shock. Captain Martinez's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest of his chair, mentally calculating the disciplinary paperwork this incident would generate. Several seasoned attorneys exchanged knowing glances. They had witnessed Judge Evans handle difficult situations before, but this was unprecedented. The young law students in the gallery leaned forward slightly, sensing they were about to witness a crucial lesson in judicial authority and professional conduct. Officer Reed maintained his casual stance, seemingly oblivious to the ripple of tension his words had created. His slight smile remained, though it began to waver as the silence stretched on. The weight of the room's collective disapproval pressed against him like a physical force. Judge Evans straightened in her chair, her robes settling around her with quiet dignity. Her eyes, sharp with intelligence and experience, fixed upon Officer Reed. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of not just her own authority, but that of the entire judicial system she represented. Officer Reed, she began, each word crystal clear in the silent courtroom. I want you to take a moment and consider your presence here today. She paused, allowing her words to settle in the air. Look around this courtroom. What do you see? The bailiff shifted slightly, positioning himself for a better view of the situation. Mary Thompson's fingers hovered over her keyboard, ready to document every word of what was surely going to become a legendary courthouse moment. Through the tall windows, a group of pigeons took flight, their shadows dancing briefly across the courtroom floor. The movement drew all eyes except those of Judge Evans, who maintained her steady gaze on Officer Reed. His smile had completely disappeared now, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. In this room, Judge Evans continued, her voice carrying to every corner. We have attorneys who've spent years mastering their craft. We have court staff who dedicate their lives to the administration of justice. We have students learning the foundations of our legal system. She gestured to the American flag beside her bench. And we have this flag representing the principles of justice and equality that we all serve. When you enter this courtroom, Officer Reed, you enter a space where titles are not just words, but representations of the roles we play in upholding these principles. The law students' pens moved frantically across their notepads, capturing every word. Their professor nodded slightly, recognizing that they were witnessing a lesson far more valuable than any she could have planned. Officer Reed's posture began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. His shoulders, previously held in casual indifference, started to drop from their artificial height. The hand in his pocket slowly emerged, and his feet moved into a more formal stance. Judge Evans noted these subtle changes but continued without comment. When I earned my place on this bench, I took an oath to uphold the law with integrity and impartiality. When you put on that uniform, Officer Reed, you took a similar oath. Both of our roles demand respect, not for us as individuals, but for the principles we represent. The morning sun had climbed higher now, its light catching the brass fixtures in the courtroom, creating small halos of brilliance. In this illumination, the contrast between Officer Reed's increasingly uncomfortable stance and Judge Evans's composed dignity became even more apparent. With remarkable composure, Judge Evans spoke. Officer Reed, in my courtroom, every person who enters is treated with respect, and every person is expected to show the same. My title is Your Honor, and I've earned it through decades of dedication to justice. The morning air grew still as her words resonated through the chamber. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, streaming through the tall windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. The historic courtroom, with its dark wood paneling and brass fixtures, seemed to absorb and amplify the significance of the moment. Judge Evans leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped on the bench before her. Her wedding ring caught the light, a simple gold band that had witnessed thousands of cases over her career. You see, Officer Reed, this isn't about formality for formality's sake. This is about understanding the foundation of our justice system. The law students in the back had abandoned their note-taking, transfixed by the scene unfolding before them. Their professor nodded almost imperceptibly, knowing they were witnessing a masterclass in professional authority and grace under pressure. Mary Thompson's fingers hovered over her keyboard, torn between her duty to record and her desire to fully absorb this moment. In her 20 years as court clerk, she had never seen such a perfectly handled demonstration of judicial wisdom. When you entered this courtroom today, Judge Evans continued, her voice carrying a warmth that belied the seriousness of her words, you chose to disregard several protocols. You bypassed security, ignored the bailiff's presence, used your phone during proceedings, and addressed this court inappropriately. Officer Reed's face began to flush, the red creeping up from his collar to his cheeks. His previous swagger had evaporated, replaced by an increasingly evident discomfort. The senior officers present watched intently, their expressions a mixture of approval for the judge's handling and disappointment in their colleagues' behavior. Captain Martinez shifted in his seat, making mental notes for the inevitable discussion that would follow. This wasn't just about courtroom protocol anymore. It had become a lesson in professional conduct that would resonate throughout the department. In this room, Judge Evans gestured to the space around them. We have attorneys who spent years earning their credentials. We have court staff who dedicated their careers to justice. We have law enforcement officers who risk their lives daily to uphold the law. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Each person here deserves respect, not because of their title, but because of their commitment to justice. The sunlight streaming through the windows had shifted, creating a natural spotlight on the proceedings. The American flag beside the bench stirred slightly in the air conditioning, its stars and stripes a silent witness to this lesson in dignity and respect. Officer Reed's posture had completely transformed. Gone was the casual stance, replaced by the proper bearing of a law enforcement officer. His hands, now at his sides, had stopped fidgeting, and his eyes were fixed respectfully on the judge. You wear a badge, Officer Reed, Judge Evans continued, her voice carrying a hint of empathy beneath its authority. That badge represents not just law enforcement, but the trust our community places in you. When you enter this courtroom with disrespect, you diminish not only my authority, but the very institution you've sworn to uphold. The gallery remained absolutely still, absorbing every word. Even the usual courthouse sounds, the distant ring of phones, the shuffle of papers, the murmur of conversations in the hallway, seemed muted, as if the building itself was paying attention. A cloud passed over the sun, briefly dimming the natural light in the courtroom. In that moment of shadow, Judge Evans's words carried even more weight. This court respects your service, Officer Reed. Your daily work helps maintain the order that makes justice possible. But respect, like justice, must flow in both directions to be meaningful. The law students had resumed their note-taking, their pens moving frantically across paper, knowing they were witnessing something that would shape their understanding of professional conduct far more than any textbook could teach. Officer Reed's smile faded as Judge Evans continued, My grandfather once told me that true authority doesn't come from a title, it comes from how we treat others. Today, you have an opportunity to demonstrate that you understand this principle. She paused, her eyes scanning the courtroom before settling back on Officer Reed. The morning light had shifted, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Through the tall windows, the city skyline stood as a silent backdrop to this moment of transformation. Let me share something with you, Judge Evans said, her voice taking on a more personal tone while maintaining its authority. My grandfather was a janitor in this very courthouse for 40 years. Every evening, he would polish these floors until they gleamed, dust every bench, and ensure every window sparkled for the next day's proceedings. The law students had stopped writing, captivated by this glimpse into their respected judge's background. Even Officer Reed's expression had shifted from embarrassment to genuine interest, his earlier bravado completely dissolved. Each night, As he cleaned the judge's chambers, she continued, smoothing her robe with a practiced gesture, he would tell me stories about the legal system. He'd point to the empty bench and say, Sarah, that seat isn't about power, it's about responsibility. The person who sits there must uplift everyone who enters, regardless of their role. Mary Thompson, the court clerk, smiled softly, remembering the kind elderly gentleman who had always greeted her with respect when she first started working at the courthouse. The memory added another layer of meaning to the judge's words. You see, Officer Reed, Judge Evans leaned forward slightly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hushed room. My grandfather never held a title that demanded respect, but he earned it through his actions. He taught me that true authority isn't announced. It's demonstrated through how we treat every person we encounter. Captain Martinez nodded imperceptibly, recognizing the profound lesson being delivered. This wasn't just about courtroom protocol anymore. It was about the fundamental principles that should guide everyone in public service. When I look at your badge, Judge Evans gestured toward Officer Reed's chest. I see the same principle. That shield isn't just a symbol of authority. It's a reminder of your responsibility to serve with dignity and respect. Just as my grandfather's mop and bucket were his tools for maintaining justice's house, your badge and my robe are our tools for upholding justice itself. The sunlight through the windows had created a natural spotlight on the proceedings, illuminating the American flag behind the bench. Its stars and stripes seemed to stand more proudly in morning light, as if emphasizing the importance of the moment. In this courtroom, she continued, her voice warm but firm, we're all part of the same system. The security officer at the door, the clerk recording these proceedings, the attorneys presenting their cases, and yes, the judge presiding. We each play our part in ensuring justice is served. Officer Reed's posture had completely transformed. His shoulders were now squared, his chin held at a respectful angle, and his hands clasped properly in front of him. The change was subtle but significant, like watching a sculpture emerge from raw stone. My grandfather passed away 20 years ago, Judge Evans said, touching the simple wooden gavel that had been his last gift to her, but his lessons live on in this courtroom. Every person who enters these doors, whether they wear a uniform, a suit, or work clothes, deserves to be treated with dignity. The courtroom remained silent, absorbed in this unexpected lesson about respect, heritage, and the true meaning of authority. The law students in the back had finally resumed their note-taking, recognizing that they were witnessing something far more valuable than a typical morning session. So, Officer Reed, Judge Evans concluded, her voice carrying both warmth and authority, shall we begin again? This time, with the mutual respect that honors not just our titles, but the principles we both serve. The morning sun had reached its perfect angle, bathing the courtroom in a golden light that seemed to underscore the significance of this moment of understanding and transformation. Whispers filled the courtroom as Officer Reed's face showed the first signs of understanding. His shoulders dropped, and for the first time since entering, he stood properly at attention. Senior officers present nodded in approval at Judge Evans' measured response. The transformation in Officer Reed was remarkable to witness. Gone was the casual stance and dismissive attitude, replaced by the bearing of a professional law enforcement officer. His hands, previously tucked casually in his pockets, were now clasped properly in front of him. The morning sunlight caught his badge, making it gleam as if to emphasize this moment of change. Your Honor, he spoke, his voice carrying a new note of sincerity. I apologize for my disrespectful behavior. You are absolutely right. The words echoed slightly in the hushed courtroom, each syllable weighted with genuine remorse. Mary Thompson, the court clerk, noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. In her decades of service, she had witnessed countless apologies, some sincere, others merely perfunctory. This one, she could tell, fell firmly in the former category. Captain Martinez straightened in his seat, a slight smile of approval crossing his face. As Reed's commanding officer, he had worried about having to address this situation formally. Now he could see that Judge Evans' wisdom had accomplished what no disciplinary action could have achieved. The law students in the back row were still taking notes, their pens moving quickly across paper as they captured this unexpected lesson in professional conduct. Their professor beamed with satisfaction, knowing that this real world demonstration would stay with her students far longer than any theoretical discussion. I've spent 15 years on the force. Officer Reed continued, his voice steady but humbled. And somewhere along the way, I forgot the fundamental principles of respect that I learned in the academy. Today has been a much needed reminder. Judge Evans listened attentively, her expression both kind and observant. The morning light streaming through the courthouse windows created a gentle halo effect around her bench, lending an almost ethereal quality to the scene. Your grandfather's wisdom, Reed added, about true authority coming from how we treat others. That's something I'll carry with me from now on. Not just in this courtroom, but in all my interactions while wearing this badge. The bailiff James, who had witnessed countless proceedings over the years, nodded slightly. He could sense the authenticity in Reed's words, the genuine understanding that had taken root. Several attorneys present exchanged approving glances. They had expected confrontation but witnessed transformation instead. This would become one of those courthouse moments that would be recounted for years to come, a testament to the power of wisdom over authority. Moving forward, Officer Reed straightened his uniform jacket. I would like to address my traffic violation case properly, with the respect this court and your honor deserve. Would you allow me that opportunity? Judge Evans' response was warm but maintained the proper judicial distance. Officer Reed, this court appreciates your candor and willingness to learn. We will proceed with your case, and I trust that this morning's discussion will have lasting impact beyond these walls. The senior officers in attendance sat a little straighter, pride replacing their earlier embarrassment. This was how the system was supposed to work, not through force or punishment, but through understanding and growth. As the morning sun reached its zenith, casting sharp squares of light across the courtroom floor, the proceedings resumed their normal course. But something had changed. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from tension to mutual respect, from confrontation to understanding. Mary Thompson began typing again, recording the official proceedings, but she knew that the most important part of today's session wouldn't be found in any transcript. It was in the visible change in Officer Reed's demeanor, in the approving nods of his fellow officers, and in the valuable lesson witnessed by the next generation of legal professionals. The American flag beside the bench moved slightly in the air conditioning breeze, its stars and stripes a silent witness to this moment of transformation. In its gentle movement, it seemed to affirm that the principles of justice and respect it represented had been well served in Judge Evans' courtroom that morning. The following week, Officer Reed returned to court, this time standing tall with proper respect. He publicly thanked Judge Evans for her wisdom, and their story became an inspiring example of how professional courtesy bridges all divides. Local newspapers praised the incident as a masterclass in dignity and leadership. The story spread throughout the law enforcement community and judicial circles, not as a tale of confrontation, but as an example of transformative leadership. Officer Reed had become an unexpected ambassador for professional conduct, sharing his experience during roll calls and training sessions at the police academy. On a bright Tuesday morning, exactly 1 month after the incident, Judge Evans arrived at her chambers to find a handwritten letter on her desk. Opening the cream-colored envelope, she recognized Officer Reed's signature at the bottom of a thoughtfully composed note. Your Honor, the letter began, your words that day changed not just how I conduct myself in court, but how I approach my entire duty as an officer. Yesterday, I encountered a young man during a traffic stop who reminded me of my former self, confident to the point of arrogance. Instead of meeting his attitude with authority, I remembered your grandfather's wisdom about respect. Mary Thompson, who had witnessed the original incident, noticed a remarkable change in Officer Reed during his subsequent court appearances. Gone was the casual demeanor, replaced by a professional bearing that inspired junior officers. His transformation had become a living example of the power of constructive correction. The law students who had witnessed the incident created a study group focused on professional ethics, taking Judge Evans' handling of the situation as their foundational case study. Their professor incorporated the experience into her curriculum, using it to demonstrate how true judicial wisdom extends beyond mere application of law. Captain Martinez had framed a newspaper article about the incident, hanging it in the precinct's briefing room. The headline read, "Respect and Authority, a lesson in professional conduct." It served as a daily reminder to all officers about the importance of maintaining professional dignity in all their interactions. Local bar associations requested Judge Evans to speak at their events, eager to hear her insights on maintaining courtroom decorum while building bridges of understanding. She always began her talks by sharing her grandfather's story, emphasizing that true authority comes from how we treat others. Officer Reed's own career took an unexpected turn. His newfound appreciation for professional conduct led him to volunteer as a mentor for new recruits, teaching them the importance of respect in law enforcement. His story became a regular part of the police academy's training curriculum on professional ethics. The courthouse staff noticed a subtle but significant change in the overall atmosphere of Judge Evans' courtroom. There was a new level of mindfulness among all who entered, a deeper appreciation for the dignity of legal proceedings. Even routine traffic cases were handled with a sense of purpose and respect. 1 year later, during a ceremony honoring judicial excellence, Judge Evans was presented with an award for outstanding contribution to legal education. In her acceptance speech, she shared the story of that memorable morning, crediting both her grandfather's wisdom and Officer Reed's willingness to learn and grow. True justice, she told the assembled crowd, is not just about applying the law. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person who enters our courts. Whether they wear a badge, a robe, or street clothes, each person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The incident had ripple effects throughout the legal community. Other judges adopted Judge Evans' approach to handling courtroom misconduct, focusing on education rather than punishment. Law enforcement agencies incorporated the story into their training programs, using it to illustrate the importance of professional conduct. As the sun set on another day in the courthouse, Judge Evans stood at her chamber window, reflecting on how a potentially confrontational moment had transformed into a lasting lesson about respect, dignity, and professional growth. The American flag outside her window caught the evening light, its colors rich against the darkening sky. In the end, what could have been a story of conflict became a testament to the power of wisdom, respect, and understanding. Officer Reed's transformation reminded everyone that true authority isn't commanded through power, but earned through respect, a lesson that would continue to resonate through the halls of justice for years to come.